Garland was excoriated just recently for refusing to enforce the law. He said, well, there may be First Amendment problems with the law. Well, isn't that interesting? This death cult, these crazed leftists, I call it the rising communists, the cadres, which are groups of communists, I consider them like commie cells out there, right? They've been, since last year, harassing Supreme Court justices at their home in violation of federal law. Federal law prohibits protests at the homes of justices, more or less, or anywhere else where they'll be, especially if the protests are designed to intimidate, harass, or affect outcomes. And how is it not intimidating for harassment or designed to affect judicial outcomes by going to someone's home and protesting? And they've been doing it since they leaked the Dobbs decision in last year. And the Biden administration has encouraged these protests. They've refused to arrest anyone involved in the protests. Garland was excoriated just recently for refusing to enforce the law. He said, well, there may be First Amendment problems with the law. Well, isn't that interesting? So there's First Amendment problems with protesting outside a justice's house, or prohibiting a protest outside a justice's house, but you can go ahead and, for the first time in history, start prosecuting people for, quote, obstructing a congressional proceeding by entering the Capitol. Isn't that a protest? Jailing people for protesting around the Capitol? So are there no First Amendment concerns there? No, there isn't, in theory, right? Because the theory the Justice Department has there, you just can't show up and protest in a way to intimidate people trying to do their jobs as government. You know, that's kind of crossing the line. It has this air of violence about it. So they target people associated with Trump and those opposed to the Biden administration who've disputed elections or done things politically they don't like. They're targeting pro-life protesters. But you show up outside the home of a sitting Supreme Court justice and they don't do anything? And it's wildly dangerous. At least one of these folks were incited, to use the term the left likes to use these days, to show up at Kavanaugh's house and try to assassinate him. He essentially admitted to such, and I think he's being prosecuted for attempted murder of Kavanaugh. And still they aren't arresting people for these protests. And these protests, by the way, they began last year. They're still continuing. They still show up every now and again outside the homes of these justices, all of whom have families, visitors and such. They're being held hostage in their own home. And this Biden administration is encouraging this attack on the court. And we're not going to stand around and just, kvetch about it. I've filed Freedom of Information Act requests, and one of them we're suing about. We sued the Montgomery County Police about records about these protests outside the justices' homes in Montgomery County. So there are two justices who live in Montgomery County. So if this is the Capitol, right? And so Montgomery County's up here. It's okay, northwest corner of the Capitol. So it's one of the closest suburbs to Washington, just north of the city. And two justices live up that way, at least two justices. On the conservative side, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh. Both of their homes have been targeted for these protests. So Montgomery County Police is also partly responsible for providing protection for the citizens there, obviously the justices included. So way back in June, we asked for documents from the Montgomery County Police for essentially communications and documents they had related to these illegal protests outside the dwellings, as we say, of Supreme Court Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. and Justice Brett Kavanaugh. And we specifically want their communications and contacts with the U.S. Marshal Service, which provides security specifically for courts, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Maryland State Police, and the Maryland Attorney General's office. So again, this leak began in May. The protests outside the homes to intimidate the justices who, quite apparently, based on this leak, were prepared to overturn Roe versus Wade. So they were trying to persuade them through intimidation and illegal behavior to get them to change their minds. And then after the decision came down, they wanted to continue to punish them. These protests began almost immediately, as I said, back in May and June of last year. Now, since the leak, the leftists have targeted conservative justices with these protests repeatedly in violation of federal law. And this is what the law says. It prohibits, quote, interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice with the intent of influencing any judge, juror, witness, or court officer. Several justices have received death threats, and in June of last year, as we discussed, a heavily armed man was arrested outside Kavanaugh's home in Bethesda, and Bethesda, Maryland's in Montgomery County, and was charged with attempted murder. Now, but despite the violations of the protest law, the law is yet to be enforced by the Biden administration's Justice Department. Garland was accused during a recent Senate Judiciary Committee hearing of politicizing the Justice Department and prosecuting conservatives more aggressively than liberals, which I've laid out for you here. For more than a year, the Montgomery County Police Department has unlawfully stonewalled Judicial Watch's request for records and communications with the Biden gang about the dangerous and illegal protests that were trying to and are trying to intimidate Supreme Court justices at their homes. So, you know, and this is just one example of the left's war on the courts. There's a specific effort to attack the Supreme Court, to attack other courts when they rule against the left on issues they care about. So we see this obviously with these protests and the near murder of Justice Kavanaugh. We see it even in Texas, where we're talking about this district court judge in Texas who ruled against the FDA. You know, the left was personally targeting him and trying to pressure him through hit pieces in the media and such. Nothing ever is done like that against left-wing judges. It just doesn't happen. They're all protected. And then you have these attacks institutionally on the court where the left wants to basically blow up the Supreme Court, pack the court, which means turning the Supreme Court into the equivalent of a Congress that gets increased numbers of justices that one party brings in to pack the court, and then obviously the next party next time around brings in more justices to undo what the last party did, and that leads to the end of the Supreme Court. I mean, that just turns it into a completely political body. It's already too political as it is. And then, of course, you still have the targeting of individual justices on the Supreme Court with hit pieces. We're seeing this with Justice Thomas. The left has been incessant since his nomination with that high-tech lynching in continuing the lynching, figuratively speaking, of Thomas throughout his career. I'm friends, obviously, you may not know, but I'm friends with his wife, Ginny Thomas, and they target her to get at him. The left is putting out fake allegations of ethics violations against Thomas because he goes on vacations with his friend and had gone on vacations with his friend and didn't report it, as he doesn't have to. And they're pretending he's violating rules that didn't exist. It's just like what they're doing against Trump. They just make up laws that don't apply and then try to convict you of them. And so they're trying to pressure Thomas, and they really hate Justice Thomas, not only because he rules against them, but because he's black. And the left really hates blacks who are conservative. And there's also this racial animus because he's married to a white woman, and they really don't like blacks who are married to whites. The left has criticized Thomas on that repeatedly. I mean, there's nothing that's beneath them in terms of trying to destroy their opponents. And we're seeing this with the Supreme Court. It's an attack on the foundation of the rule of law, the foundation of our constitutional system. Remember, we have 3 branches of government, and they want to essentially outlaw or eliminate or turn into a toothless tiger an entire branch, the judicial branch. They're trying to put in a cage the executive branch. And as we saw during the Pelosi Congress, all bets are off with Congress. The left doesn't like representative government. They don't like a Republican form of government. So anything they can do to blow up our constitutional system, in this case going after the courts, that's something they're very excited about. So we're not only going to expose it through our investigations and litigation, but we're going to educate you about what the truth is here with this crazed leftist attack on the rule of law. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.